What if you could live a life where no one judged you? Think about that for a moment. You could live a life where no one judged you because no one wants to be judged. Even when we know we're wrong, we don't want to be judged by anyone. So what if you could live that life? But wouldn't it start with you not judging others? If you could live the life where you didn't judge others in your heart and others didn't judge you, I think we'd be getting closer to the world that Jesus wants for us. And Jesus himself said, do not judge, or else you too will be judged. That's what we're going to talk about today, trying to find that life free of judgment, or at least getting that judgment way, way, way down in our lives. Hi, I'm Sam Hunter. This is 721 Live, the media arm of 721 Ministries. I'm glad you joined us. Thank you for being with us today. For the last several weeks, we've been talking about bumping the trajectory, going deeper into the kingdom, getting closer to Jesus, doing things that actually do propel us deeper into the kingdom. And I was thinking about this over the weekend because last week in one of the men's groups, one of the young men said, I just feel defeated. I come to 721 Ministries. I'm active at my church. I've actually joined another Bible study. I feel like I'm going backwards. And it occurred to me that after all this talk, and whenever you're dealing with men, maybe not as much with women, ladies, while you're listening, but when you're dealing with men, if you talk about bumping the trajectory, you talk about going deeper into the kingdom, they automatically want a list, or their mind automatically goes to adding activities, another Bible study, another small group, more active at church. Think about Galatians 5:22 through 23, the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Do you hear any activities in that? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. I don't hear activities in that. I don't hear a checklist of things that you can do. Now, sometimes adding activities is good, can be helpful, but that is not the key, and I don't want you to walk away hearing that you've got to add more and more and more. Really, it's about the heart. I mean, in 2 Peter, Peter writes in the very first chapter, make every effort to add to your faithfulness goodness, and to your goodness godliness. And he goes right down the list, and none of them are activities. So it's the heart that really matters, opening up our heart to Jesus, opening up our heart so that he is our, not just our Savior, but our Lord, Master, that he's in more and more, not just in charge of our lives, but we're working in partnership with each other. That's what he wants for us, to be in partnership with him. It's part of what he meant when he talked to his disciples in his last supper in John 14:15 to 16. He said, I don't call you disciples or servants anymore. I call you my friend, because we're going to do this together. So give your heart a rest. Give your activities a rest, and focus more on your heart and getting closer to Jesus. And that really plays into this whole idea of judging, because judging is an element, it is an issue of the heart, the mind and the heart. And Jesus said, do not judge. As a matter of fact, he said exactly in Matthew 7, at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, the beginning of chapter 7 on the Sermon on the Mount, do not judge. I want you to watch for the warnings. Listen to the warnings. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Who wants to be measured by the way we judge someone else? Why is Jesus being so emphatic about these warnings? You could, if it wasn't Jesus, you could take them as a threat. But why is he being so demonstrative about these warnings? Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you'll be judged. Why is he doing that? Well, we could come up with lots of reasons about how bad judging is and all of that, or what it does, what we're doing when we're judging, the superiority, the pride that comes into play, and all those kind of things. The bottom line is, he knows how bad it is for our hearts. He knows how bad it is for our hearts. He knows how bad it is for those in whom we're with relationship. He knows it's poison. And so he says, don't do it. Don't do it. And I know that sounds like for many of us, that sounds like a steep mountain to climb, but Jesus is there to help us transform our hearts. And he knows how bad it is for our hearts. I see this as sort of a dual function. Do not judge, or you too will be judged by the people you judge. If you judge someone, they're likely to judge you in return. If someone judges you, you're likely to return that judgment. So there's the process of human to human, let's say, of when you judge, others are going to judge you back. You're going to get into that cycle, and it's all rat poison for the heart. It doesn't help anybody. It's certainly not enhancing relationships. But I think there's also Jesus warning that God's going to judge you. God's going to judge you when you judge others. Which brings up the question, which some of the men asked over this past week. Well, wait a minute. If we've surrendered our life to Jesus, if he's our Savior, if we've been born again, we are no longer under judgment. And that is true. We're not talking about end times judgment. We're not talking about eternal judgment. We're talking about consequences of the sin of judging. Not only is it going to be a person to person, a human to human, but God's going to say, okay, you're judging. I'm going to let it roll on you. I might even punish you for it because I want you to stop doing it. So before we even take another step about judging, let's realize that Jesus has given us these warnings for a reason. Because he loves us. He loves you. And he knows it's not good for you. And he loves your wife or your husband or your children or your parents or whatever your siblings, the people at work. He loves them, and he doesn't want us judging each other because it's not helpful. Now, we started 721 21 years ago. My desire was to open the scriptures to men. It's a men's ministry. To open the scriptures to men, for us to talk about the scriptures and how it applied to our lives as men, as husbands, as fathers, as business owners or businessmen. But I also was struck with the warnings from Jesus that people don't pay attention to. There's lots of warnings in the Old Testament. The prophets are always warning. God, through the prophets, are always warning the Israelites about an impending judgment if they don't stop living the sinful lives they're living. But in the Newer Testament, with Jesus, there are just as many warnings. But they come from Jesus, so we don't really pay attention to them. But if I'm going to be true to what he's asked me to do, I have to make sure we all know there are some serious warnings in here. And one of them is, do not judge, or you too will be judged. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to read from the scriptures a section in Jeremiah, chapter 3. Now, I've never heard a preacher preach on this. And I've never heard anyone in a podcast even talk about it. But it's it's 2 or 3 paragraphs. Listen to this, and we're going to hear the term faithless Israel and faithful Judah. Now, faithless Israel is the northern part of Israel, of what we would consider to be Israel. It's the northern kingdom, and they really went off the rails badly. Judah is where Jerusalem is. It's where the temple is. It's the middle part of Israel. And so when you hear faithless Israel, think of whatever states you want to think of that you think has gone off the rails. Now, I live in the South. I live in the Bible Belt of the South. So we would think, I'm not trying to judge. I'm just giving you some examples. Maybe California, maybe Oregon, maybe New York, whatever. Just, if you live in the Bible Belt of the South, then we are Judah. We are faithful Judah. But don't think automatically that I'm patting Judah on the back because God's going to wear them out in just a moment. But just think in terms of whatever states. I'm just going to use the state of California. I love California. I've been there many, many times, plan to go back. But in my view, living in the South, they've kind of gone off the rails. So when you hear faithless Israel, think whatever state. I'm going to use California. When you hear faithful Judah, I want you to think of South Carolina, where I live, the Bible Belt. And you're going to be shocked at what the conclusion by God is in this. So just follow along with me. Jeremiah 3, verse 6. During the reign of King Josiah, the Lord said to me, have you seen what faithless Israel has done? Faithless California, let's say, has done. She has gone up on every high hill and under every spreading tree and has committed adultery there. Some translations will say she's played the whore. By the way, you'll notice throughout the Old Testament, there is a lot of marriage language when God talks to his creation. He talks to us. It is oftentimes in marriage language. We have this here. I thought that after she had done all this, she would return to me. But she did not, and her unfaithful sister Judah saw it. South Carolina. I gave faithless Israel, faithless California, her certificate of divorce and sent her away because of all her adulteries. Yet I saw that her unfaithful sister, South Carolina, Judah, had no fear, and she also went out and committed adultery because Israel's immorality mattered so little to her. California, New York, Washington, Oregon, whatever states you want to use, because Israel's immorality mattered so little to her, to Israel, she defiled the land and committed adultery with stone and wood. That would be the idols that she used. In spite of all this, her unfaithful sister Judah, South Carolina, who watched this, did not return to me with all her heart, but only in pretense. Yikes. That's an indictment. Now, this is the conclusion, and it might shock you. We've got faithless Israel, just off the rails, just totally divorced from God, and we've got faithful Judah, who's done almost just as bad. The Lord said to me, faithless Israel is more righteous than unfaithful Judah. Faithless Israel, in God's eyes, is more righteous than faithful Judah. Whatever state you want to choose that in your eyes has gone off the rails morally, God is saying, well, you know what? South Carolina, you think you're the Bible Belt? I hold you to a higher standard. See, Judah had Jerusalem. Judah had the temple. Judah had all the priests and all of that. And God said, look, yeah, California's gone off the rails, but you're worse because you should know better. So none of us can judge. It doesn't matter how we might look at someone else. We are in no position to judge. We have no idea how far short we may fall in God's eyes. So I just wanted to start with that. We don't know, so let's be very careful about judging anybody in our sphere of influence and anybody in the country. Judging is an interior sin that ends up being an exterior action because it comes through our eyes and our mouth. You know, we learned long ago that wives oftentimes feel judged by their husbands. When the husband's pulling in the driveway at the end of the day, I've experienced it. I used to be in the renovation business, and I might be working around the house with the guys that work for me. The wife would be there. She's in a good mood. She's happy. She's energetic. And as the day winds down towards 5 or 6 o'clock, or she hears the car coming in, you can see her countenance slump because he's here and he's going to judge her. I don't know why our wives feel like we judge them. I can't get into the minds, but I do know that it's a fact. So with our eyes, so it's an interior sin of the heart, but it becomes an action through our mouth and through our eyes. And it is part of our heart because Jesus said, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And I've observed this several times in the last few years. As my parents got older, as their friends got older, I've seen people, when dementia came into their lives, their personality flipped. They may have been wonderful, sweet, upstanding citizens in the city, and when dementia came in, they started cursing people, terrible attitudes, complaining, yelling. And I mentioned this to my wife, who's a physician, Dina, and she said, when dementia comes in, the filter goes off, and what's in your heart comes out of your mouth. I've seen other people, as dementia came in, they got sweeter and sweeter and kinder. My father was that way. He was always a kind man all my life, but when dementia came in, he got sweeter and sweeter. What's in your heart is going to come out. I don't want that in my heart. I don't want my grandchildren hearing granddaddy say that, blah, 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 blah. I don't want that. So I want my heart cleaned out, and I'm going to start with trying not to judge, to work on the idea of judging. Because we'll talk about some of the words that we might associate with judging in just a moment. But let me stop and ask you a question. What sin in the Scriptures offends God the most? And what sin let's just say in the Gospels, seemed to offend Jesus the most? Pride. It's throughout the Older Testament. You find it in Proverbs. You find it over and over. God God disdains a proud heart, a haughty heart, but loves the humble. Jesus was always upset with the Pharisees and the Jewish authorities, not the Jewish people, the Jewish authorities, because of their pride. C.S. Lewis, if you followed us for any time, you know that I have read a lot of C.S. Lewis. He had something to say about pride in his book, Mere Christianity, and I just want to read you a couple of paragraphs because I think he gets it just right. He says, I now come to that part of Christian morals where they differ most sharply from all other morals. There is one vice of which no man in the world is free, which everyone in the world loathes when he sees it in someone else, and of which hardly any people except Christians ever imagine that they are guilty themselves. I have heard people admit that they are bad-tempered, or that they cannot keep their heads about girls or drink, or even that they are cowards. I do not think I have ever heard anyone who was not a Christian accuse himself of this vice, and at the same time, I have very seldom met anyone who was not a Christian who showed the slightest mercy to it in others. C.S. Lewis goes on to say, there is no fault which makes a man more unpopular, and no fault which we are more unconscious of in ourselves, and the more we have it in ourselves, the more we dislike it in others. Can I get an amen on that? The vice I am talking of is pride or self-conceit, and the virtue opposite to it in Christian morals is called humility. Well, now, we have come to the center. According to Christian teachers, the essential vice, the utmost evil is pride. Unchastity, anger, greed, drunkenness, and all that, C.S. Lewis says, are mere flea bites in comparison. It was through pride that the devil became the devil. Pride leads to every other vice. It is a complete anti-God. That's how C.S. Lewis phrases it, and I think he's right, don't you? Pride leads to all these other sins. And certainly we cannot divorce pride from judging. When we're judging, we're being prideful. In a moment, we'll talk about the difference between discerning and judging. So there's pride that leads to judging. There's judging versus discerning. But again, discerning is a slippery slope, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But there is a difference. But again, judging is a part of the heart. And I don't want my heart to be full of that. So I want to listen to Jesus and listen to his words and say, this is not what I want to do. Think about a word picture, or a picture, let me just say that, and you've got one person looking down on another person, or you've got one person looking horizontally at another person. You see, vertical is judging. When you look down on someone, you're judging them. When you're looking horizontally at someone, you're discerning. Judging carries with it the idea of being superior, condemning the other person, maybe even having contempt for the other person. Horizontal, when you discern, you have empathy. Now, I say empathy instead of sympathy. Empathy means you can relate to what they're experiencing. You've experienced it yourself. Sympathy is, yes, I mean, it's funny when I tell men, if they're telling me all the things that are going wrong in their life, at some point I'll say, I really am sorry. I'm sorry for that. And almost to a man, they will say, oh, that's okay. I'll work it out. Don't worry about that. I'll work it out. Men cannot receive sympathy. I'll say to them, is it okay? Can I not feel bad that you're in this situation? Can I not feel some sympathy for you? But men bow up. But sympathy is different. Empathy means I understand what you're going through. So if someone else is sinning or someone else is doing something I don't approve of, versus looking down on them with that superiority, which is never a good thing, or condemnation, which is never a good thing, I'm looking sideways. I'm looking at them eye to eye, person to person, with empathy and with grace and understanding and a desire to help. You're really not trying to help anyone when you're judging them. It may come out of your mouth as if you're trying to help them, but we both know you're not trying to help them when you're judging them, when you're condemning them, it goes so far as you have contempt for them. Discerning means I see it, I'm staying out of the emotions. I'm just as bad as you. There's no way I'm judging you, but I want to extend grace. I want to extend understanding. I want to extend love, but I also want to help. So there is a difference. We can discern and not judge. But I haven't really been able to pull that off very easily. That's not something at which I excel. There's a passage in Ephesians where Paul writes, the Holy Spirit through Paul says, in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. So apparently, we can be angry and not sin. Jesus was angry when he kicked over the money tables. Just go read Matthew 23, 24, 25. When he got into those woes against the Pharisees and the Jewish authorities, he got angry, but he was sinless. Can you? Because I cannot. I cannot pull off being angry and not sinning. And I could read this, I could just insert discerning. In your discerning, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still judging, and do not give the devil a foothold. I could substitute discerning, because even though I think I can discern, I think I have a discerning heart. I think I can watch men, anyone, and with a discerning heart see where they're going off track. But boy, that's a slippery slope. And I don't want to fool myself that I can discern and not judge. So I want to be very careful there, and I encourage you to. I think can I be angry? Can I have righteous anger and not judge? Well, yes, but I haven't been able to pull that off. So it's very difficult to discern and not judge. Watch yourself, because it's very hard to do one or the other. Can you judge? Can you discern with a prideful heart? I don't think so. Can we discern without judging? Yes. I think that's easier. That's something we can do more easily than we can be angry and not judge. But it is a slippery slope. So let's take that to heart and think about it. What I want to talk about for just a minute is this real stark statement, story, mini parable that Jesus gives us. This sort of follows up with what I was just talking about. It's another one of those warnings. And it's in Matthew 5:22. It's even prior to this, because we're in Matthew 7. It's prior to this. It's still in the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus gives us an example, and he says this. He says, but I tell you, and this is right after he's talked about being angry versus murdering someone, having anger in your heart. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Okay, there's that warning again. Again, and he's carrying on this thought. Anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. Raka is the kind of sound that you would make in Hebrew, a bit like spitting at someone. Jesus says if you say to someone Raka, if you use that term, you're calling them an idiot. You're calling them a knucklehead. There's some other words that we could use. You're just saying they're stupid and they've done something stupid, all right? It's not a complimentary term. It is an attack, but it's not as bad as what he's going to mention next. But if you're on your church grounds, if you're out in the churchyard after or before church, or you're in a deacon's meeting, or whatever the setting is, and you tell someone they're an idiot, you're likely to be called before the governing board of your church, and they're going to say, you cannot talk to people that way. You may be called before the Sanhedrin. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. Yeah, you might be called before the board of elders or deacons or whatever. But, and here's the contrast, anyone who says you fool will be in danger of the fire of hell. Now, Jesus is making a huge distinction between calling somebody a knucklehead or even an idiot versus calling them a fool. He says you're dancing around the fires of hell when your heart is so dark. See, in our culture, calling someone a fool is not as bad as it was over the previous centuries. It's still something, if you thought about it, nobody wants to be called a fool. One of the men in one of the meetings said, well, Sam, if I were to say to you, you're foolish versus you were wrong, that's not as bad as calling you a fool. And as he said it, I thought, I don't like that either. I'd rather you tell me that I was wrong than tell me I was foolish. Now think about it. Let that sink in for a minute. Someone says you fool to you, or says that was foolish. That's going to hurt. Now, here's what Jesus is saying. If your heart is such that you say that to someone else, you are so full of contempt. Your heart is so hard. Your heart is so dark that you're dancing around towards the flames of hell. If you're saved, you're not going to hell. But you have to ask yourself, how much is Jesus Lord of my life if I'm thinking that way in my own heart? If I have so much contempt that I take the humanity out of someone and call them a fool, they're worthless. Jesus says that's a bad heart. You don't want to have that heart. Now, we're all subject to that, especially in these political times we're living in where there's so much division. It's been true in the world of Christianity. It's been in our world all through history. But we are in a very difficult and precarious time now, and we have to watch our hearts and watch this idea of judging. Because Jesus says, I'm telling you, you're flirting with the fires of hell when you talk to people like that. Now, the way I want to end today, I'm going to give you a brief look and then we'll come back and talk about this later. Jesus said the solution to judging is to first look in the mirror. First look in the mirror and see yourself. It's just like when we started off with Jeremiah chapter 3. Look in the mirror and realize, whoa, look at me. I cannot judge other people. He gives us this very well-known passage. How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? And I would insert here, look in the mirror. You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye. First look in the mirror and take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see more clearly to remove the speck in someone else's eye. Jesus says, look in the mirror. Look in the mirror before you judge someone else. That's the first step. We're going to talk about this next week and the week after that, because you can see Jesus is very emphatic about do not judge. We can discern and not judge. We can hope to convict and not condemn. And all this is because there's more. You know it. Come, follow Jesus. Stop judging, and you will find it.